The following program contains descriptions of animal exploitation and excessive rhyming. Viewer discretion is advised. I know a little story, and I'll tell you just what I know. On a farm in 1945 in Fruita, Colorado, there lived a chicken with a farmer man and his farmer wife. The couple were called Olson, and the chicken they called Mike. He was a Wyandotte rooster. He was friendly, sweet, and bold, and he looked his best with his big, broad chest. He was only 5 months old, with a crimson comb and a bright red wattle. If you ask me, he could have been a chicken model. He would stand on a perch and crow at the sun, and he'd preen to keep clean, and he'd preen just for fun. And after the rain, he'd run all around and gobble up earthworms he saw on the ground. He was just a normal chicken, nothing special, nothing new, and he ran and walked and pecked and squawked like all good chickens do. And he slept in a coop and grew well accustomed to an easy chicken life with the lady and her husband. Until one day, when Clara's mother came to stay. "What would you like for dinner, Mom?" "I want fresh fried chicken." Is there anything else?" "I want fresh fried chicken." Can I tempt you with tofu?" "Fresh fried chicken." "How about a corn dog?" "Fresh fried chicken." "Would you rather have a casserole?" "Fresh fried chicken." "Leftover KFC?" "Fresh fried chicken." Clara knew it was no use to argue with her mother's word. She called out to her husband, "Lloyd," and said, "Bring me the bird." Lloyd only nodded and then trotted with his hatchet out the door. I mean, come on, let's be real. He's done this kind of thing before. Like a villain in the evening, Lloyd approached the chicken coop, stepping carefully and softly to avoid the chicken poop. Poor Mike was jolted from his sleep as Lloyd busted the latchet and laid our hero on a stump and lifted up his hatchet. Now, I know this is just awful. Please excuse this diatribe, but Mike's grisly execution is too painful to describe. Let's just say the farmer did what he always does in this case. When a rooster's big and fat, they send him to a better place. But alas, I must explain to you exactly what occurred, because precisely how the hatchet cut the head of this poor bird was with the precision of a surgeon. The hatchet cut across his brain, leaving behind the brainstem and an intact jugular vein. So that day in chicken heaven, only Mike's head would arrive. Because yes, his head was dead, but Mike, he was alive. He clambered back on his 2 feet and opened up his wings. At first, old Lloyd wasn't surprised. He'd seen these kinds of things. It may seem strange to you and me, but for farmers, it's routine. A headless chicken will briefly run around the scene. Inside the nervous system, there are electrical reactions. The stimulated nerve endings can cause a moving action. The movements of a headless bird are just involuntary, and these effects that we can see are only temporary. They watched as Mike ran round and flapped his wings about. Lloyd said, "I'll let him do his thing until he runs all out." "Give it time," said Mrs. Olson. "Pretty soon he'll drop." But hour after hour they saw the chicken didn't stop. And though amused, the farmers knew he'd shortly come to rest. So they put poor Mike into a box, went in, and got undressed. Maybe Mike was wondering how it was he did survive. Or perhaps he just forgot he needs a head to stay alive. Who knows what thoughts ran through Mike's severed brain that awful night. But he stood brave and steadfast and lived on till morning's light. As the sun came up, he couldn't see it, but somehow came to know to take his perch and puff his chest and let out a mighty crow. Well, at least he tried to crow. You see, he couldn't really manage. He just let out a gurgle due to his obvious disadvantage. He still could breathe from his breathing tube, but no vocal cords to speak. And he tried to preen his feathers, but he didn't have a beak. He couldn't peck the ground for worms or forage, but at least, for all Mike's awful problems, little Mike was not deceased. When the farmers Olson came outside and saw their chicken running, without a head, Lloyd Olson said, "Now this is simply stunning." Clara agreed, "It's really strange. What should we do with him? Should we end his suffering? His outlook is quite grim."
"You know," Lloyd said, "I've never seen a chicken live this long. With its head cut off, I reckon that to kill him would be wrong."
"Look, his trachea."
"His what?"
"His breathing tube."
"Oh, weird. So he can breathe as long as we make sure to keep it cleared. Oh, I see his esophagus."
"His what?"
"His eating tube."
"Oh, so we can use this eyedropper to give him all his food." Well, the farmers had a story that nobody else could match, that Mike the chicken took a beheading like it was nothing but a scratch. So the Olsons learned to feed and care for Mike and to accept that Mike was still a normal chicken despite the absence above his neck. After about a couple more weeks, a fortnight if you'd like, the couple by now had gotten used to living with Headless Mike. So Lloyd decided Mike was well enough to be shown around, and he hitched his horse to his wagon and took the chicken into town.
Tell you what, in this here town, there's nothing neat to see. Everything I've seen round here's about as plain as it could be.
Well, this town is just average. Nothing special, nothing new.
The only thing that's strange round here's when the circus passes through.
You know, I heard in Denver there's a sheep who's got 2 tails. In Pueblo there's a feller who'll eat up glass and nails. In Glenwood Springs, there's a talking cow who smokes and wears a hat.
But here in plain old boring Fruta, we ain't got nothing like that. So, gentlemen, I hear you fear this town is boring and mundane, and you would like to witness something interesting and strange. Well, 2 weeks ago I cut the head off a chicken. The chicken didn't die, no, he kept on a-living.
You said a chicken lost its head and lives instead of dying?
If someone tried to tell me that, I'd say that they were lying. I've never seen a headless chicken living, but I think if someone showed me one of them, I'd buy that man a drink.
Tell you what, if I could see that chicken before my face, I'll buy a round of drinks for everybody in this place. Well, with no further ado, come on in, Mike.
The people were amazed, and they shouted out in cheer. The town had found its champion, and Lloyd got lots of beer. The story spread as people told of the amazing headless spectacle, and folks who hadn't seen him yet were naturally skeptical.
A chicken kept on living with its head severed in 2?
Darling, when I hear such tales, I presume they are untrue. But everybody who heard about it hungered for the chance to see the headless chicken do his silly headless dance. The people pestered Lloyd and Clara with perpetual queries and offered to portray the matter with preposterous theories. Like,
It looks like something Frankenstein could make with knobs and switches. It must have been a magic spell, and you two must be witches.
maybe he's possessed by an evil you-know-what.
Maybe he's still got a brain. He just keeps it in his butt.
The Olsons couldn't really say. It was outside their dominion. They decided they should go and seek expert opinion. To the nearest university, still a lengthy trip to take, they made their way to Utah in the city of the Great Salt Lake. There they sought a scientist, perhaps a bird biologist, to answer the questions that persist. Just how on earth can this bird exist? And I'm sure those uni researchers could not have suspected that on that day they would receive a guest quite unexpected. Well, doctors, we're quite anxious now to hear what you have to say.
How does he stay alive?
And will he be okay?
I'll answer all your questions, but first, please step this way. We've subjected Michael to a battery of exams.
Yes.
We've analyzed and scrutinized and run through our programs.
We've poked and prodded
Done an audit.
and thoroughly checked him out.
And now we have a theory as to how this came about.
And?
It seems he's lost his head. But not all of his brain. While 2/3 were removed, one important third remains.
In the forebrain are olfactory lobes. They control the sense of smell. And Mikey doesn't have a nose, so I guess it's just as well.
The midbrain here contains the optic lobes, which deal with sight. And Mikey lost his eyes, so he can't use those. That's right.
But the portion of the brain that has remained whole and complete
Is the portion of the brain that keeps young Michael on his feet.
in the brainstem, called the hindbrain,
As in every vertebrata.
is the cerebral cerebellum.
And medulla oblongata.
It controls the vital functions like heartbeat and breathing.
And processes the nervous messages it is receiving.
So provided Michael's trachea can remain unobstructed,
We think he can go on to live a life uninterrupted.
the Olsons were relieved. It was quite good news to hear. So he's not possessed with magic.
And his brain's not in his rear.
Well, the doctors gave the farmers a certificate of authenticity to authenticate Mike's legitimacy and indicate with specificity that Mike the Chicken
Of Fruita, Colorado,
born April 1945,
is a genuine,
bona fide,
indubitable bird.
who lost his head,
But he stayed alive.
and crowds of curious college kids and queues of keen supporters came along with photographers and newspaper reporters. And even though his infamy was interesting and funny, just having a headless chicken didn't make them any money. They had lots of work to do at home, and they had lots to lose. And the Olsons had had their fun and were just pleased to have made the news. So Clara and her husband headed home to their farm life. Yes, simple living was just right for Mr. Olson and his wife. And they kept close watch on Headless Mike, that he came to no harm. And their normal lives continued normally on the Olson farm. But meanwhile, rumors culminated. The newspapers were circulated. The headless chicken story had the country captivated. And back in Salt Lake City, hanging around the old newsstand, the news of the wondrous headless bird reached one particular man.